All right, so a few weeks ago, I asked for some suggestions on how I can further teach my friends online and my followers on Facebook and Instagram about landscape photography and composition in general. And I did get this suggestion quite a few times, enough to be compelled to actually do it. And I've thought of doing this for quite a while now, but really the imposter syndrome is just has just really been keeping me from having the confidence to do such a thing. But if there's anything that really pushes me to do this, it's the fact that critiques are actually the best ways to teach photography. This is the best way to teach someone photography because if you are someone who gives constructive criticism, then of course this can really boost the artistry and the skills in the photographer no matter how good they already are. Because basically when we do critiques, it's not about pointing out the flaws, it's pointing out what can be done to improve the photos in general. So that's why I finally agreed to do a photography critique. And I very discreetly posted about this only through stories on Instagram and once on Facebook. But I was surprised that I got over 100 entries from so many photographers. And so I've decided to make this a two-part critique. As much as I can, I wanted to cater to everyone, but of course, we would have to pick some of the best and some of those with the most potential. And so our friends from Lowepro Philippines were really generous and they wanted to incentivize this. So we are giving away one prize to the two top photos for the entire thing. That means that each episode will have one winner of a gift from Lowepro Philippines. And you will find out about the winner at the end of the episode, and you will find out about the prize at the end of the second episode. Let's get right onto it. What I'm gonna do is basically I selected the top 12 out of everything, which is based on, of course, first and foremost, impact, and perhaps the next is the amount of what can be done to improve the photo in general. Because again, we're doing this not just to give away a prize or to show off our photos, but actually to learn a few things. So even with the photos that I'm criticizing or giving a critique on rather, there is that benefit to me as well because I get to try and see what can be improved, and in the process I can also learn. So yeah, let's get on to the first image, and this one is coming from Marlon M, or if I'm not mistaken, Marlon Malabuyok. So I do have a pen with me because I will be marking a few things just to better show you guys how to improve or basically to point out what I am trying to point out visually. So yeah, this is a very solid long exposure image. Um, I I can really appreciate that this was given a lengthy exposure because we can see that the flow of the water of the waterfall is really smooth. First I can see is that there's a bit too much negative space on the bottom. And when we're shooting waterfalls, this is kind of the tendency because of course we're shooting from far away from the waterfalls because if you have tried shooting waterfalls, it's a very tricky task, especially when you're very near the falls or you're facing a really huge um, waterfalls to begin with because the spray of water there's going to be a really strong mist depending on how close you are and how big the waterfalls are. And it's pretty challenging to be very close because the front element of your lens is definitely going to get wet and smudged. Um, so that's why shooting waterfalls is quite tricky. Now, um, again, the tendency is to have such uh, negative space on the bottom. So to improve the visual design altogether, I think I would crop it around here and cut the negative space in half. Um, Another reason is because there is a bit of a graduation towards the end right here, which is getting a bit more luminosity. And so it's kind of turning into a distraction instead of drawing my eyes towards the waterfalls altogether. Also, I think it would benefit from being cropped into a square because maybe generally there's not much more on this area, and it can kind of give us a bit more simplicity in that. But of course, this, as I said, this composition was already working, and I guess the farthest I would go is maybe clean out or clone out the clutter in the middle to just take out some more of the distractions in the frame. And the clutter I'm talking about is this one because generally you want to avoid anything bright or anything relatively bright at the edge of the frame, and this also counts as that. So one way you can do is clone it out. The other way you can fix this is maybe use a graduated tool, and that's it. And perhaps the last distraction I would take out would be this vine right here. Simply because it's very vertical to a point wherein it does not agree with the flow of the composition. And this one kind of works perhaps, and this one also does not work for me. And that's generally it. I would just really clean up this image and rid it of the distracting um, elements at the edges as well as the ones that kind of mess with the direction of the image altogether. But again, as I said, generally this was already an amazing photograph, and these are just some suggestions on what you can do to improve it. Next image comes from AJD. And of course, we're dealing with generally low resolution photos because I just had the images sent over on Instagram. And yeah, again, another solid image. I'm I think this image was taken in Payong Point in Batangas, if I'm not mistaken. So this is perhaps one of the automatic things that a photographer would do when shooting this location. The the rocks are always facing towards the sunset, so it's really an automatic thing to just place the sun in the middle, um, and just let it have a nice sunburst right smack at the very middle. Now, what I actually want to do is I want to check if this was actually right smack in the middle. So let me take these out. And when we use a grid, we can actually see that. So no, it's not right smack at the very middle. Perhaps turning a bit, maybe moving a few inches to the left would work, just so you can get that sunburst right at the very middle, just like that. The problem with this one, with cropping, is that we're gonna cut out one of the edges of the rock in the foreground, which isn't gonna be symmetrical either because there is a bit of space on the right side. So the solution is not cropping, but really moving a few inches to the left and um, turning to the right a bit. But generally, again, this is already a very solid shot. I can see that the exposure was very lengthy because there's very few ripples in the water. Maybe a few more seconds, maybe half a minute, would have given you much smoother to take out some of the ripples right here. But again, this one already works, but you can see some ripples. And again, just to improve it would be to have an even smoother surface. So I would probably there's a bit of a challenge there because we know that this sharp sunburst cannot be captured with such a long exposure. I For the foreground, I would maybe shoot that for at least 2 minutes or maybe even longer if the tides are or if the waves are actually quite strong. But the problem is that the sunburst would virtually be erased by the movement of the sun. So perhaps the effective way to do that is to shoot this as a composite. So first expose for the texture you want in the water, then get the sunburst. And perhaps the last thing I would do is just clone this little bright cloud at the very tip of the image just to take out that distracting uh, dangling illuminated element on the very edge. And that's pretty much what I would do for this image. Now, this next image is from Angelo Rosales. And this image taken from that area near Harbor Square is a really popular place to shoot because of this curved breakwater. And that's very nice to shoot and also practice long exposures at because of course we can see kind of a contrast between the water on the left side and on the right side. Um, this is perhaps the composition you would really go to when you shoot this location because you want to get that curvature. It's really not the fault of the photographer here. It's just that really when you're shooting, you're too far away from the cityscape that the breakwater takes so much attention away from the cityscape. Now, perhaps a way to get past that limitation is for the city to be brighter. So the only thing perhaps I would do is shoot this in twilight so that this part where the cityscape is would be much brighter than the foreground. But all in all, the composition works. The I can see the exposure was done long enough to get a nice texture of the water, and that's basically it. If you shoot this at twilight, you can get, of course, the blue skies with a bit of mist by the water, and the breakwater will still be much bigger in terms of proportion to the cityscape. But the fact that the cityscape is glowing would give it a bit more visual weight. This next image comes from a good friend actually, and it's very funny that he sent me this single entry saying that it just might come in handy if I needed some more content. But really, I know this guy and he shoots really well, so it's not much of a surprise to see his photo in my top 12. I don't know where this was taken, but this was taken by my good friend Lloyd San Diego. And really, it's a very solid image altogether. Only a few points maybe to improve this image. You would have learned by now that I usually avoid having some dangling elements on the edges. So we have that right here, and we have that right here. So maybe zooming in or cropping would really have worked. And perhaps what this image is missing is a silhouette or a blurred figure of a human maybe walking in a very strategic portion of this pier. And personally, I would just get someone to walk right here or maybe right here, to just have a bit more visual pull towards the center, of course, which is basically where the visual design is pointing all together. And lastly, I think the most I would do right here is correct the white balance, because I can see the yellow. Usually, the lights we have on these things are warm, so I can see that there's a bit of a greenish discoloration, which means that maybe the white balance was a bit shifted. And also, of course, you can see a lot of purple in the sky. And generally, we don't get skies this purple. So maybe there was a bit of a shift in terms of the white balance, because generally, similar to the limitations of dynamic range, is the limitation of the camera to get all the colors in between. So the camera getting all the shades between the blue right here and the warm orange or yellow over here, there are a lot of shades missing in this part. A lot of cameras kind of miss on getting the right shades in between in this area in general. So maybe a bit of a fix on white balance and also in terms of color grading. Okay, and I did say that I selected 12 to have 6 images on this batch and 6 images on the next. And I noticed that the fifth image, which is supposed to come next, was a bit too small in terms of file size, to the point that it cannot be shown with enough justice, to say the least. So this next image is the top image for this batch for the critique. And this image comes from Denjib Seblos. I am a sucker for photos like these, because this is that kind of landscape shot wherein you don't even need to set up a tripod. You don't even need filters at that point. This was perhaps taken handheld with a telephoto, and I love being able to shoot things like these with a telephoto. And really, all you need to do is find the right composition. And we can see that he went with these multiple diagonal lines that kind of give us a good abstract pattern. And those lines are of course being highlighted by the perhaps the sunrise or the sunset. I think it's the sunrise. And yeah, generally I wouldn't even change a thing about this. Maybe take out some clutter. Um just clear out some here and some here and some here, and that's generally it. Um Perhaps I like this because I have a similar image taken in Doña Remedios Trinidad. And really I can just imagine how glorious that sunrise was. So perhaps the takeaway is that um, landscape images don't always have to be wide, and landscape images don't always have to be long exposure. And really this kind of composition just gives you the ability to flex your composition muscles and your creativity. And that's the reason why I was immediately drawn to this image when I saw it. So yeah, this is the top image and the winner of the prize for the first batch of the critique. There we go. That basically is the first batch of images for our critique. And again, thank you for everyone who sent in their entries. For this one, we had over 100 entries. And the top 12 are just some of the really amazing photos that I saw on this. But if I were to extract as much as I can from the submissions, I could maybe do about 5 or 6 episodes of these maybe. There is more to see on the second batch. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel, whether or not you're part of the contest or whether or not you submitted your images. Don't forget to subscribe to see the next set of images and find out what you might win.